What started as a routine late-night interview turned into television chaos when Morgan Freeman and Stephen Colbert clashed over AI voice synthesis, leading to the legendary actor's explosive exit from the studio. Stephen Colbert paced behind his desk, scanning his production notes one final time. His producers had briefed him about Freeman's media restrictions, but Colbert had built his career on pushing boundaries. The AI voice synthesis story was trending across social media, and his writers had crafted what they considered comedy gold around the controversy. Despite explicit instructions from Freeman's publicist, Colbert decided the potential viral moment outweighed any diplomatic concerns. The studio audience settled into their seats as the familiar theme music began to play. Colbert emerged with his characteristic grin, delivering his opening monologue with practiced ease. When he introduced Freeman, the audience erupted in respectful applause. The legendary actor walked onto the stage with his measured, dignified stride, offering a warm smile and firm handshake to his host. "Mr. Freeman, welcome back to the show," Colbert began, his tone deceptively casual. "It's always a pleasure to have you here. How are you feeling about your latest documentary on climate change?" Freeman's eyes lit up as he began discussing his passion project, describing the years of research and interviews that went into the production. His deep, resonant voice filled the studio as he spoke about the urgency of environmental action and the responsibility of storytellers to illuminate truth. The conversation flowed naturally for several minutes, with Colbert asking thoughtful questions about the filmmaking process and Freeman's role as narrator. But then Colbert's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly. His smile became more calculating, his posture more predatory. "Speaking of your voice work," he said, leaning forward slightly, "I have to ask about something that's been all over the news lately. These AI companies have been using your voice to create synthetic audio without your permission. How does it feel to know that anyone can now sound like Morgan Freeman with the click of a button?" The change in Freeman's expression was immediate and unmistakable. His warm demeanor evaporated, replaced by a steely intensity that seemed to drop the studio temperature by several degrees. "Stephen," he said slowly, his voice carrying a warning edge, "I believe we discussed this topic being off-limits before the show." Colbert's grin widened, sensing he'd struck a nerve. "Well, yes, but it's such a fascinating story. I mean, your voice is literally being stolen by artificial intelligence. Doesn't that make you feel replaceable?" The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension building between the two men. Freeman straightened in his chair, his jaw tightening visibly. "My voice represents decades of work, craft, and personal identity. It's not a commodity to be replicated by machines or mocked on late-night television." His words carried the weight of genuine hurt and frustration, but Colbert seemed oblivious to the emotional impact of his questions. "But come on, Morgan," Colbert pressed, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Isn't it kind of flattering that AI considers your voice worth stealing? I mean, they're not trying to replicate my voice." He gestured to himself with mock self-deprecation, but his eyes remained fixed on Freeman with predatory intensity. The audience's laughter felt forced and uncomfortable. Freeman's publicist, watching from the wings, looked increasingly alarmed. As the interview spiraled beyond their worst-case scenarios, she began frantically texting Freeman's management team, knowing that this confrontation could have serious repercussions for both parties involved. Freeman's hands gripped the arms of his chair as he fought to maintain his composure. "Stephen, this isn't about flattery. It's about consent, respect, and the fundamental right to control one's own voice and image. These companies are profiting from my life's work without permission or compensation." Colbert leaned back, clearly enjoying Freeman's discomfort. "But isn't your voice just sound waves? How can you own sound waves? I mean, if I talk like this," he began doing an exaggerated impression of Freeman's voice, complete with theatrical hand gestures. "Am I violating your copyright? The studio fell silent except for a few nervous chuckles from audience members who seemed unsure how to respond. Freeman's eyes flashed with something dangerous, a fury that had been building throughout. The exchange. The legendary actor's reputation for grace under pressure was being tested in ways he'd never experienced in decades of public appearances. You're trivializing something that affects not just me, but every actor, voice artist, and performer in this industry, Freeman said, his voice rising slightly but maintaining its controlled cadence. This technology threatens the livelihoods of countless working artists. But Colbert wasn't finished. With the cameras rolling and sensing viral content potential, he pushed even further into dangerous territory, completely abandoning any pretense of respectful discourse as the confrontation reached a boiling point that would change both men's careers forever. "You know what, Morgan?" Colbert said, his voice dripping with condescension as he leaned forward across his desk. "Maybe this is exactly what Hollywood needs. A reality check. You've been coasting on that voice for decades, and now technology is showing us that maybe it wasn't that special after all." The studio audience gasped audibly, several people shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they witnessed what felt like professional suicide in real time. Freeman's face transformed into something none of the crew had ever seen before. The gentle, wise persona that had defined his public image for decades cracked, revealing a man pushed beyond his breaking point. "Coasting?" he repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Stephen." "Oh, but I do," Colbert replied, his trademark smirk widening as he sensed he was getting under Freeman's skin. "I mean, let's be honest here. Your whole career is built on having a nice voice and playing God a few times. Now that computers can do your job, maybe it's time to admit that the emperor has no clothes." The host's producers frantically gestured from behind the cameras, trying to signal him to dial back the aggression, but Colbert was too intoxicated by the confrontation to notice. Freeman stood up slowly from his chair, his imposing 6'2" frame casting a shadow across Colbert's desk. The movement was deliberate, controlled, but carried an unmistakable threat. "You want to discuss careers, Stephen? Let's talk about yours. A failed comedian who built his reputation by hiding behind a character, mocking people who actually create meaningful work." His voice remained steady, but every word felt like a precision strike. The audience fell completely silent, the tension so thick it seemed to physically weigh down the studio. Colbert's smile faltered for the first time, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "At least I don't need a computer to do my job," he shot back, his voice rising defensively. "At least when people hear me speak, they know it's actually me, and not some algorithm." "You think this is funny?" Freeman asked, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You think destroying someone's dignity for cheap laughs makes you clever? You're not a comedian, Stephen. You're a bully with a platform." The words hung in the air like an indictment, and several audience members began to murmur their agreement. Colbert's face flushed red as he realized he was losing control of both the interview and the audience. "I'm not the one who's obsolete, Morgan. The world is moving on, and maybe it's time you did too." He gestured wildly with his hands, his composure completely shattered. "Technology is replacing actors, writers, everyone. At least I'm honest about it instead of pretending like I'm some untouchable legend." Freeman's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer to Colbert's desk. "Untouchable? You've spent the last 10 minutes trying to touch me, to diminish me, to reduce my life's work to a punchline for your amusement." His voice grew stronger with each word, filling the studio with an authority that made Colbert shrink back in his chair. "But you know what the real joke is, Stephen. In 5 years, when people have forgotten your name, they'll still remember mine." The host's desperation became palpable as he realized the interview had spiraled completely out of control. "Is that a threat?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Are you threatening me on live television?" "I don't make threats," Freeman replied, his voice returning to its characteristic measured tone, but with an edge that suggested volcanic fury barely contained beneath the surface. I simply state facts. And the fact is, you've revealed yourself tonight as someone who has no respect for the craft, no respect for your guests, and no respect for the people who trusted you with their stories. Colbert looked around desperately at his producers, who were making frantic cutting gestures across their throats. But the damage was already done. The live audience had turned completely against him, with scattered boos and expressions of disgust visible throughout the studio. Social media notifications were already exploding on staff phones as clips of the confrontation began circulating. Online. "You know what your problem is, Morgan," Colbert said, making one final catastrophic attempt to regain control. "You can't handle the fact that you're not relevant anymore, that your time is up, that maybe these AI companies are doing the world a favor by showing us that the great Morgan Freeman is just an old man with a nice voice." The silence that followed was deafening. Freeman stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, his eyes boring into Colbert with an intensity that seemed to strip away every pretense and artifice. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute finality. "You know what separates a professional from a pretender, Stephen?" Freeman asked, his words cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "A professional knows when to stop. A professional understands boundaries. A professional respects the people who honor them with their presence." He paused, letting each word sink in before continuing. "You are none of these things." Colbert's face went white as the full impact of Freeman's words hit him. The studio audience, which had been murmuring their disapproval, fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep filming what was clearly becoming a career-ending moment for their host. "I've been in this business for over 50 years, Freeman continued, his voice gaining strength and authority with each syllable. "I've worked with legends. I've created characters that will outlive both of us, and I've earned every single accolade through dedication, craft, and respect for the art form. You sit behind that desk and mock what you could never achieve." Colbert tried to interrupt, his voice desperate and shaking. "Morgan, I think you're taking this too personally." "Too personally?" Freeman's voice exploded with controlled fury, causing several audience members to jump in their seats. "You've spent the last 15 minutes attacking my life's work, my legacy, my very identity as an artist, and you think I'm taking it too personally?" He stepped even closer to Colbert's desk, his presence now completely dominating the studio space. The host's producers were frantically signaling from behind the cameras, some holding up signs that read, "Commercial Break," in desperate capital letters, but Colbert seemed paralyzed by the situation he had created. His trademark confidence had evaporated, replaced by the look of a man who suddenly realized he had awakened something far more powerful than he could handle. "You want to know what's truly pathetic about tonight?" Freeman asked, his voice returning to its measured cadence, but losing none of its menace. "You had the opportunity to interview someone who has dedicated their entire life to storytelling, to craft, to bringing truth and beauty into the world. Instead, you chose to be a tabloid journalist, a gossip columnist masquerading as a talk show host." Colbert's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. The audience had turned completely against him now, with scattered calls of shame and apologize audible throughout the studio. The host's staff looked on in horror as their boss's reputation crumbled in real time. "Do you know what AI will never be able to replicate, Stephen?" Freeman asked, his question hanging in the air like a challenge. "Soul, heart, the human experience that comes from living, learning, failing, and growing. That's what separates true artistry from mechanical reproduction. That's what you'll never understand because you've never possessed it." The words hit Colbert like physical blows. His face contorted with a mixture of rage and humiliation as he realized that Freeman had turned the tables completely. The actor wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing Colbert's fundamental emptiness as both a performer and a human being. "You think you're so superior," Colbert sputtered, his voice cracking with desperation. "Standing there lecturing me about art and soul when you're nothing but a voice actor who got lucky. At least I built my career on my own talent, not on some genetic lottery that gave me a deep voice." The audience gasped audibly at this final, devastating insult. Freeman's expression shifted from anger to something far more dangerous: complete and utter contempt. When he spoke again, his voice was so quiet that the entire studio strained to hear him, yet every word carried the force of a thunderclap. "Genetic lottery?" Freeman repeated, each syllable dripping with disdain. "You think this voice, this presence, this ability to connect with millions of people around the world is just an accident of birth?" He shook his head slowly, a bitter smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You really don't understand anything about what we do you?" Colbert's face was now completely red, sweat beading on his forehead as he realized he had pushed far beyond any point of redemption. His desperate attempt to regain control had only made him look more pathetic, more small, more unworthy of the platform he had been given. "I've spent my entire career studying the human condition," Freeman continued, his voice building to a crescendo that filled every corner of the studio. "I've portrayed presidents and prisoners, gods and mortals, heroes and villains. I've used my voice to narrate the story of humanity itself. And you reduce that to genetics? You reduce a lifetime of dedication to chance?" The legendary actor turned to face the audience directly, his back to Colbert in a gesture that was both dismissive and final. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the crowd with the dignity and presence that had made him beloved worldwide, "I apologize that you had to witness this display of unprofessionalism. You deserve better entertainment than watching a grown man destroy his own career out of spite and ignorance." The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the studio. Colbert sat frozen behind his desk, his face a mask of shock and humiliation, as he watched his guest command the respect and admiration that he himself had just forfeited forever. Freeman stood in the center of the stage, basking not in the applause but in the vindication of his dignity. The ovation continued for nearly 2 full minutes, with audience members shouting words of support and encouragement. "You tell him, Morgan," one voice called out. "We love you," shouted another. The legendary actor nodded graciously, his composure completely restored, as he acknowledged their support with the quiet dignity that had defined his entire career. When the applause finally began to subside, Freeman turned back to face Colbert one final time. The host looked like a broken man, his usual animated demeanor replaced by the hollow expression of someone who had just witnessed the destruction of everything he had worked to build. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of his own desk, unable to meet Freeman's steady gaze. "Stephen," Freeman said, his voice now carrying the tone of a disappointed father addressing a wayward child, "I want you to understand something. This moment, this conversation, this choice you made tonight, it will define you far more than it will ever define me. People will remember how you treated a guest who came here in good faith, who trusted you with their time and their story." Colbert's mouth moved soundlessly, his face cycling through expressions of rage, shame, and desperation. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of his professional suicide as it unfolded in real time. His producers had given up trying to signal for commercial breaks, recognizing that the damage was already irreversible. "I've been doing this long enough to know that respect is earned, not demanded," Freeman continued, his words carrying the weight of decades of experience. "Tonight you showed this audience, these viewers, and the entire entertainment industry who you really are beneath the jokes and the late-night persona. You showed them a small, petty man who builds himself up by tearing others down." The studio fell silent again as Freeman's words echoed through the space. Even the camera operators seemed transfixed by the moral authority radiating from the veteran actor. Colbert tried once more to speak, his voice coming out as a barely audible croak. "Morgan, I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot here." "No, Stephen," Freeman interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "We didn't get off on the wrong foot. You deliberately chose this path despite being explicitly asked not to. You made a conscious decision to prioritize your own entertainment over basic human decency. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a character flaw." Freeman began walking toward the exit, his movement slow and deliberate, allowing his words to resonate throughout the studio. "I've spent my career telling stories about the human condition, about redemption, about the possibility for people to grow and change. But redemption requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and growth requires humility. Neither of which you've demonstrated tonight." As Freeman reached the edge of the stage, Colbert finally found his voice, desperation making him reckless one final time. "Wait," he called out, standing abruptly from his chair. "You can't just leave. We're not finished here." Freeman paused at the stage exit and turned back slowly, his expression shifting from disappointment to something approaching pity. "Oh, but we are finished, Stephen. More finished than you realize." He looked directly into the main camera, addressing the millions of viewers watching at home. "To everyone watching tonight, I want you to know that this is not what our industry represents. Most of the people I've worked with throughout my career understand that we're in the business of bringing joy, inspiration, and truth to audiences. We're storytellers, not bullies." The audience rose to their feet again, this final ovation even more thunderous than the first. Freeman raised his hand in a gentle wave, his dignity intact despite the ugliness he had endured. As he turned to leave, Colbert made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "This is live television," Colbert shouted over the applause, his voice breaking with strain. "You can't just walk out on live television. Think about your reputation." Freeman stopped one final time, not bothering to turn around as he delivered his parting shot. "My reputation was built over 50 years of professional excellence, Stephen. It won't be damaged by one night of your unprofessionalism. But yours? Yours was destroyed by 15 minutes of showing your true character." With that, he walked off the stage with the same measured dignity he had displayed throughout his entire career. The studio erupted in chaos as Freeman disappeared into the wings. Audience members continued applauding and cheering while others pulled out their phones to capture and share what they had witnessed. Colbert stood alone behind his desk, the reality of what had just occurred beginning to sink in, as his staff rushed around frantically trying to figure out how to salvage what remained of the show. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. Ambry, Respect Morgan Freeman began trending worldwide, while Colbert Meltdown followed close behind. The Late Show's official social media accounts were flooded with criticism and calls for Colbert's removal, while Freeman's representatives were inundated with offers of support from fellow actors, directors, and industry professionals. By the next morning, major news outlets were covering the story as a cautionary tale about respect, professionalism, and the consequences of crossing certain lines. In the name of entertainment, Freeman's graceful handling of the situation only enhanced his reputation, while Colbert faced calls for his resignation and a significant drop in ratings that would plague his show for months to come. The confrontation had indeed changed both men's careers forever, one elevated by dignity, the other diminished by the very behavior he had chosen to display.